Hey there, friends. So I got a question in a comment the other day, and I responded to it, but I actually wanted to do a video about it because I thought it was a good question. These are the kinds of things I always like to explore. The question, was in response to a video I had done back in March about numerology and tarot and how once I started reading with Marseille style or pip-style decks, I found myself sort of freed up. There was something very freeing about working with decks in this way. And the question was essentially like, I don't buy that, because there are pictures on the court cards and there are pictures on the trumps. So, you know, why is it more freeing to not have pictures on the pips? And it's a hard question to answer. But I'm going to do my best because it's a good question. And one of the things that I, love so much is trying to seduce people into trying new things. Because I can tell you, for many, many years, I was opposed to reading with these kinds of decks, with pip decks, because I just thought they were kind of ugly and boring. And once I opened myself up to it, like this whole world opened up. And over like this time last year, I started saying I really want to change the way I read, and I just want to make my readings more practical and more thoughtful and more useful, and a little less psychological and a little less spiritual. And when I say that, it's not a criticism of readings that are psychological or spiritual, and it's not to say that my readings weren't thoughtful before. It's just that what I started to need changed, and what I wanted to offer people changed. And it's not about replacing anything. You know what I mean? I still use decks that have pictorial or scenic or situational pips, whatever you want to call them. But I find it more interesting, and I find that I get a different experience that I find helpful when I'm using decks that don't have scenes or situations pictured on the pips. So let me just try to sort of make this make sense in a way that's sort of simple and clear. So I'm gonna get a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck here. Okay. This this is the illuminated tarot, the Carol Herzer illuminated tarot. This was the first indie deck I ever bought. And so it's a good, it's just the most Rider-Waite-Smithy one that I have handy. All right. So here are some, famous. Can you see these? Should I zoom in? This, by the way, is a beautiful handmade deck, and it is literally handmade because she prints, laminates, and I think still paints them for you if you want them to be. And so here are four of the sort of most famous images in the Rider-Waite-Smith. The Ten of Cups, the Five of Cups, the Four of Cups, and the Three of Swords. So, I didn't even realize I had pulled three cups. Oh well. So let's just think about how the picture benefits us, right? So as we're doing a reading, it's very easy when we look at these pictures to say, oh gosh, in the Five of Cups, there's this sense of regret. There's this sense of loss. There's a sense of having given up on something or just sort of sadness. In fact, you get the same sense a little bit with the Four of Cups. So you can kind of see how the Four of Cups leads into the Five of Cups. It's like an opportunity presented itself, and you didn't take it, and you kind of lost out on it, for example. So there's a little bit of a narrative that we get with the pictures, especially in a suit. The Three of Swords, of course, is famous, and it originates with the Solabusca tarot. The Ten of Cups is like, that's the card you want to see in a reading. So, we get immediately a sense of the feeling of the experience that is going to happen in the reading. So it's super beneficial in that way. You know what I mean? We get a sense of like the feeling of the card almost immediately. We know when we see the Five of Cups or the Three of Swords that it's not going to feel good. We know when the Ten of Cups shows up, it's probably going to feel good. You know what I mean? So in that way, the pictures are really helpful, and it's one of the main reasons I stuck with this deck for so many years. You know, I mean, I've been reading for 17 or 18 years now. It's hard to remember, but I think I started in like 1999. And burned through a lot of decks trying to find the perfect one, but nothing ever was better to me than the Rider-Waite-Smith, and so I used it a lot in its different incarnations. So again, this isn't like to say that that system is bad. What happens sometimes, though, you know, is you'll get the Ten of Cups in a reading, in response to, you know, why don't I feel good, or you know, something like that. And you can explain all the layers of 10, but what you as a reader initially see is that happiness, and what your client sees is happiness. And so it's a weird sort of disjointed, you know, incongruent thing, for example. Now, you can talk about all of that. But it makes it harder for the card to be anything more than like a happy family. It makes it hard for the Three of Swords to be anything other than heartbreak. You know, and when I think about the Three of Swords in particular, swords are about air, and I'm very, very committed to the elements of the pips in particular. That has always really mattered to me because it seems to focus on the four important parts of our lives, you know, the things that really matter to us, that we're really passionate about us, or our desire, you know, our sex drive, our feelings and our families and our emotions and our hearts and our souls, in the cups, the things we think about and the things we say and the things we learn and the things we teach in the swords. And then like money and responsibility and duty and, you know, commitment in the pentacles. You know, those things really matter to me. But when we're looking at the Three of Swords, what we get is like heartbreak. And it's hard not to see this as heartbreak, right? But swords are about the mind, you know, and so it could be thinking about heartbreak. But that to me is sort of, it's not what that suit is about necessarily. And so there are, in the Rider-Waite-Smith system, some elemental inconsistencies from my point of view. That's how I feel. And if you feel differently, then good. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it's supposed to be. I just want to share with you what feels right to me and how I've developed. So this isn't about heartbreak. It's about communicating or experiencing or teaching or learning. Now, heartbreak can be a teaching experience. And so that's how I traditionally read that experience when I did these readings. I felt like it was about, I always talk about this. There's a song in the musical The Music Man called The Sadder But Wiser Girl for Me. And to me, that was always sort of how I summed up the Three of Swords. So, you know, again, like I absolutely find these workable, you know. But what's interesting to me is I feel like there's more, there can be more shades and colors to the cards than the picture lets on, especially once we start learning about what the numbers can mean and how they partner with the element. And so while this, you know, is certainly great and helpful, what happened when I started working with decks that didn't have that, hang on, I'm going to close the window. Somehow in my neighborhood, beautiful days equate with noise. When I started working with decks that didn't have that there, you know, when I would get sort of this mess of you know, pippishness, something happened where, you know, I had to think differently. Let me get a couple other. I had to think differently. Let's get these all together. But what happened was that I wasn't sort of hemmed in or restrained by a picture of three swords piercing a heart. You know what I mean? And so that's hard, right? Because I didn't have that to rely on, but I also didn't have that to explain. I didn't have to teach the person I was reading for, or even myself, you know, that the Three of Swords was not necessarily about heartbreak, but it was about learning more. And so what happened was I started finding myself more relaxed in the process of reading. and I started finding myself working with the combinations of cards more, and how the feeling of the card and how the relationship between the element and the suit and the other cards and the question all kind of started to sort of come together into something, and I didn't have a picture there to force me to make the Three of Swords be about heartbreak. You know, like if I were to look in terms of this combination here, the Two of Cups, and you know, you get a sense of sort of partnership there, don't you? Even though it's just two cups, the Three of Swords, the dreaded Three of Swords, and then the Eight of Coins. Now, in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, we would have two people toasting each other, a heart pierced with three swords, and then a dude working on some pentacles, you know, making something. That would be sort of a very different reading than if I'm talking about this as partnership, a feeling of partnership, as learning something new and growing intellectually, and then putting in our day's work to get our you know, our responsibilities paid for, to get our lives paid for. Like this card actually, in the system that I've developed after sort of reading a lot of systems and reading a lot of stuff, like this actually sort of feels very much like the Rider-Waite-Smith, but this one doesn't, you know. And so it just kind of opened things up for me, and it allowed me to think in terms of like, oh, okay, I have this partnership, but the partnership isn't ending. The partnership is actually expanding their way of thinking. You know, it's not like it's causing them heartache. It's actually making them like think about totally new things. And it's kind of blowing their mind because they're like, I never knew that things could be this way before. And so suddenly I'm really like interested in doing the day-to-day work of the relationship, you know, with the Eight of Coins. Like it's not just about going to do your job, it's about like going to do the work of a relationship, which relationships are. So this relationship, this partnership has made them think and grow into something new, and they're like, yeah, I can go and like do the banal things with my partner. I don't have to, you know, it doesn't have to be sunshine and roses and knight in shining armor and fantasy all the time. Like when we're doing the dishes and paying the bills, I'm still, you know, happy in this partnership, and I never knew that I could feel that way. So it gives me a whole sort of open quality to the feeling of the reading, that I don't get with the Rider-Waite-Smith. What I do get with the Rider-Waite-Smith is sort of very specific situations. What I get with this is sort of more air and more opportunity to sort of think about how I never ever do one card readings with a Marseille deck ever. I will do them occasionally with a White Smith, because I have a lot to work with. You know, if I just got the Three of Swords alone, it's sort of like, oh, your mind is expanding, your mind is growing. Okay, like, but why and how? So these cards come in and they give me context. So this partnership is making your mind expand, and it's helping you do this new thing. You know what I mean? So it just kind of freed me from thinking in terms of like, what's the picture on the card. Now, that sounds like it was a relief. And for me, it kind of was, because I was trying to get to a different place, you know, than other people may be trying to get. But the other thing is, it's a different system that can help you come up with different things. And it's another tool for your toolbox, you know. And I'm a big believer in like, let's get as many tools in our toolbox as we can fit in there, so that when we need them, we have them, you know. And it's about picking the right tool for the right job. You know, you don't fix a clogged up sink with a hammer. You know, you need a snake for that, so you reach for the snake. You know, it's about like arming ourselves with as many tools as we can get, and then using them to help us achieve the results we're hoping to achieve. So that's why I felt the pips are really freeing. Now, why does that make it different from the trumps and the court cards? Well, the court cards are people for me. And I've come, you know, I've done videos on the courts a lot lately. For me, the picture on the courts don't super matter all that much. What matters frequently for me with the courts is kind of where they're going. You know what I mean? So in that case, the picture is and has always been useful to me. You know what I mean? Especially with the knights. But you're sort of like, which way is the Page of Cups facing? You know, in this spread here, we've got these two dudes looking at this one. So, you know, right out of the gate, just sort of looking at where they're going, I could say, like, oh, there's a little bit of, like, a cult status here, you know, or there's a little bit of jealousy. So, because the court cards actually represent people and not situations, you know, the picture is fine, but the detail in the picture to me doesn't actually mean that much, except for where they might be looking. You know, in this pairing, I might say that there's some conflict here, you know, because they're both holding weapons up at each other. So, like, that's how the picture matters to me. The Trumps, the pictures on the Trumps, again, you know, in the question, they said, well, what, you know, you could just have Roman numerals on the cards. And you could just have the name. Again, the picture doesn't super matter to me as much as where they're facing, if they're facing in any particular direction. Whoops. But also, the Trumps aren't situations. The Trumps are, you know, this is an old phrase, we hear this a lot. The Trumps are archetypes. And to me, what that means is that they're metaphors for experience. But it's an experience, it's not a situation. You know what I mean? Like, this is a situation. This is a happy family celebrating. That's a situation. You know, the magician is, or the hanged man, we're not talking about an actual magician. We're talking about the feeling or the experience that the magician represents in terms of being really good at sleight of hand, at sort of really good at making people see things that he wants them to see. The hanged man isn't literally about getting hung. It's about sacrificing something in order to achieve something greater, or it's about consequences of actions. You know what I mean? It's about punishment. So, you know what I mean? Again, the pictures don't super matter to me as much. The way they might be facing whenever there are people in a reading, I'm always sort of interested in that, because sometimes in like a 9-card spread, all the characters may be looking like in the same direction towards one card, and that's really helpful. But yeah, you could just have the Roman numerals. You know what I mean? Like, you could just use a deck of cards that you've got, you know, index cards, and write the name of each one on the card and read with that. That's okay. You could definitely do that. But they're different than the pictorial pips, because what the experience to me of the Trump isn't a happy family celebrating something good. You know what I mean? The magician isn't literally a magician. The Trumps have a more I mean, the pips have a more literal experience of, like, you missed out and you lost something. You know, that's a very specific thing that happens in life. This is like the sense of someone being crafty and thoughtful and kind of using everything they need to get what they want. That's more, the Trumps are more generic in a way. You know, but they're visual metaphors for something larger. So that's kind of a clumsy way to think about it. But, you know, whatever system you use is the right system for you. My aim is never to replace, you know, the system that you use and love. What I want to do is excite people into finding new things. You know what I mean? So if you see my videos and I'm kind of rambling about how Marseille decks are freeing, well, they have been for me. I'm just talking about my experience. It's not to say that you should run out and you know, forget everything you ever learned, you know, and do the system. What I'm saying is, like, hey, you know, here's this cool thing I found. You know, here are these cool people who helped me find it. Let's, you know, this could actually be helpful to you too. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, so when I think about the pictorial pips, it's like, this is a situation that could really happen in life. This is not so much a situation that happens in life. It represents the experience of something that happens in life, if that makes any sense. So those are my thoughts on that. It was a really good question. And again, you know, I'm always willing to answer these sorts of things and talk about them. Just always know that, like, my experience is my experience, you know, and I'm not trying to push my experience on you. All of my videos are about me sharing things I've learned and things I've discovered, and, like, cool things, you know, whether it's trimming a deck that I thought looked better, or this, you know, don't run out, you know, like, I'm not saying, oh boy, if you don't trim this deck, you're a loser. I'm saying, look how cool I think this looks, you know, and that's how I feel about this too. So those are my thoughts on why I find pip decks freeing. But, you know, it's not about replacing anything. It's just about adding more tools to the toolbox. So, as always, be well, and I'll talk to you soon.